Hi everyone! For this week's module, I was assigned Skinner Chapter 12. Chapter 12 is called The Question of Control. This chapter begins with the statement that a person's behavior is based on environmental and genetic factors rather than the person making creative and independent choices themselves. However, the belief that human behavior is determined cannot be fully proven. It also receives tremendous backlash, regardless of the facts behind it. Skinner then mentions how human behavior and control correlate to one another. An organism reacts to its environment, and its achievements are crucial to its success and survival. Control is almost impossible to eliminate in today's world. Humans have been controlling their environment since the very beginning, and will always continue to try and control their environment in order to enhance their success. The important thing to remember is the conditions in which we control the environment. Skinner then digs into counter-control. Counter-control is a way to oppose control. Skinner uses examples such as the government, religion, organized agencies or institutions, and even educators as forms of control. For example, those who are members in the groups I just previously mentioned may become fed up with being controlled and become defiant. Therefore, they may engage in protest, resign from the group, disengage, or even start a revolution against the previous institution. Skinner explains that there are scenarios in which an incentive system may resolve major conflict in which both sides maintain their individualized well-being. The next section is on ethics and compassion. Skinner goes into defining certain characteristics such as devoted or compassionate by looking at the effects the characteristics have on other people around them. For example, I think my mother is caring because she cared for me for 18 plus years of my life. I originally found it conflicting how Skinner states that these desired features are lacking in forms of counter-control. As he explained, I began to grasp the concepts in which control and counter-control do not simply balance each other out. Along with counter-control, humans treat each other well due to ethics and compassion. Altruistic behavior, as mentioned by Darwin, points out the importance of reciprocal action. Feelings such as compassion are counter-control modified. Skinner states that the example of, we do not hurt others because, first of all, it reduces our human species' chance of survival, and ultimately, hurting others hurts ourselves too. It is not due to the fact that we may know what it feels like to be hurt ourselves. Treating others typically translate into others treating us well in return. Moral behavior can be explained through a person's will of following directions. Skinner brings up the distinction between contingency-shaped behavior and rule-governed behavior. People typically do the right thing based on past reinforcers or even on who is enforcing the rules. Skinner digs deeper and states that we behave ethically based on the contingencies of behavior. For example, a religious individual may feel more affected by the threat of going to hell than an individual who identifies as being an atheist. This is due to prior contingencies that shape the different behaviors between the two different individuals. People show different amounts of morals and ethics due to their prior exposure to its contingencies. Later in this section, Skinner describes the consequences of mentalism. Blaming others for our actions is one of those consequences. Individuals who are not tied down by the mentalistic approach may begin to think of other behaviors besides blaming others. The next section is called The Struggle for Freedom. Skinner talks about freedom as a feeling that has caused great trouble. The feeling of freedom is characterized by not being influenced by any outside governments or any outside forces of control. People who are free are perfectly strengthened by themselves. There would be no desire to change others or change anything if this were the case. Skinner's example of the government needing money on page 218 makes so much sense and ties back to the discussion of free will in previous chapters. Forcing others to pay taxes creates backlash and defiance. However, by allowing others to volunteer, this creates a sense of free will or freedom amongst taxpayers. The difference is the amount of control placed on others. Skinner ties in persuasion in this section as a means of describing potential reinforcements. On page 220, Skinner talks about the controlling social environment. Skinner states that it is almost easy to understand why individuals oppose control so bitterly. It is the mistreatment that controllers place that creates such a bitter feeling. Skinner talks about how the freest of all individuals on this planet are newborn babies. His genetic endowment is influenced by the natural and social environments around him. By being reinforced for what he does, he will produce in ways that encourage the continuing of that reinforcement. His environment is all around him through friends, family, government, and so on. His future behaviors are dependent on the future contingencies and reinforcements placed around him. Skinner concludes this section talking about the benefits of a group. One person's lifetime and the reinforcements and consequences in their lifetime are to be maintained in some way by his social environment, otherwise known as their group. The last section in this chapter is called The Evolution of a Culture. Skinner states that culture has a sense of power. He continues to question, what creates culture? What causes culture to change or evolve? Culture is constantly evolving, and Skinner describes the evolvement to be incredibly important, which makes incredible sense in today's society. When a culture is struggling to evolve, you may come across what Skinner called is a sick society. This is when contingencies do not generate the same behaviors or reinforcements. This then leads to contradictions in our society. In order to fix a sick society, generous and consistent reinforcement must be in place. This can translate into better ways of teaching, governing, and overall controlling. There were 3 commonalities that were discussed in this chapter: natural selection, social environment evolution, and operant conditioning all share the common value of survival. Contingencies of reinforcement has the power to change behavior. Rather than focusing on an individual to control, controllers must look at the world we live in as its entirety. Looking at the social environments, otherwise known as culture, is the way to do so. Skinner concludes this chapter with multiple questions regarding a culture with no major ruler who controls others in potentially harmful ways, and also the potential of a culture evolving into the obsession of an individualized fulfillment where culture slowly becomes forgotten. In reflection to Skinner's questions, I believe that many individuals are concerned about their own personal successes and freedoms. Therefore, I can see a culture in which individuals forget about the roots of certain cultures. However, I do see an evolving culture, and with that being said, I find it hard to predict what the future will hold. I have a few different questions that I would like to discuss regarding the information brought up into this chapter. Number 1, have you ever been in an environment in which you felt that the controller was doing too much controlling? How did you behave? Number 2, do you believe your social environment or your culture has influenced your behaviors in the past? If so, how do you think they will influence your future behaviors? And lastly, do you think your behavior will be more focused on your personal freedom or the social environment in which you are familiar with? Thank you guys for listening, and that concludes Chapter 12.